So we're going to quickly transition into our next panel session about creating and sustaining a diverse pipeline. But I want to personally thank James for your message because it's quite powerful. And I think affecting change is really about having the hard dialogue and the conversations and bringing it forward. So thank you so much. So Melissa, I'll invite you up to the stage.
So thank you, everyone. Now we have the time to go to our panel to talk about diversity. But first, just also in reference to what James has mentioned here, I don't know that I've ever thought about being on The Apprentice show, but I can tell you right now it's definitely not on my list. But one thing that's lovely about this idea of diversity, and we started this yesterday, as Lisa already mentioned, and we were talking mostly about gender, because that actually is what comes to mind when we talk about diversity. A lot of times, it's the first thing that comes to mind. And what was great is James already started it, and we're going to continue that, is talk about diversity in a bigger sense, looking at background, looking at culture, looking at age, any number of things. So the reason why I'm here, so I work with Swift. Swift is one of our partners, and I have an organization called Greenlight for Girls. And as James was already alluding to, part of our audience, our future generation, our future pipeline, coming from the young women who are in the area. And as with all of us, we're taking a look at where our futures are going. And we're also looking at trying to create an environment in our companies that match who we're trying to reach. So to match also the clients and the customers we're trying to look at. So with that, I'd like to bring onto the stage our panel. So first, if I could ask for Fern Nai to join us. Fern is the CEO from Community Business in Hong Kong. Thank you. So next I'd like to bring onto the panel is Hashim Shawa. He is the Chairman and General Manager for the Bank of Palestine. And then finally, Scarlett Seaver, and she's the SVP of Open Innovation and Ecosystem Building from BBVA. So please welcome everyone. So with this, you can tell already from just hearing a little bit about our background, but then also about what you may have read about our different profiles, is we are representing different environments, and as well with James Sun joining us onto the stage. So we're going to look at any number of things. So what I'm going to do is ask a few questions to get us started, but our overall goal is we wanted to think about why you came into the session. And if it were all of us, the reason why we would want to come in is to have a better understanding of what we're experiencing in our own industries, and our own companies, our own environments, but then also what we're doing about it, what we've seen done. So some practical ideas and things that we can take forward. So that's what our goal is today. So with that, I'd like to first set the scene and just start about what we all know, where we're coming from, and just looking at all of us, and certainly not going into order, but Hashim, if I could ask for you first, is you're from the Bank of Palestine. So looking at, what are you looking at as far as diversity issues within your organization and also your community?
Thank you, Melissa and James. Great talk there. It was early in the morning, but definitely I think everyone was energized with what you said. Palestine, okay, Bank of Palestine, we're the first and largest Palestinian bank. We're the second largest private sector employer. But Palestine is typically associated with, front page news, the headlines, especially in the last few weeks. You've probably seen escalation in the political crisis with the conflict. Living in Palestine, the issues that we face seeking independence and freedom and establishment of our state and equal rights for both Israelis and Palestinians to live in peace. All of those issues are the macro backdrop that we live and work under. So we have some pretty basic issues that our community, our population faces on a daily basis in terms of discrimination and all of that. Now, in the business of banking, very social, relationship-based, service-based industry, I think the question of diversity is all about community. It's all about being socially sensitive. It's about winning the hearts and minds and the trust of the people. And we've seen the industry take a massive hit in the developed world and even developing world. Its reputation isn't that great when it comes to doing the right thing and being socially sensitive. Banks are typically associated with being more bottom line, profit driven. So I think the way we look at diversity at the bank is more about balance and more about the balance between risk and profit and also making sure you do the right thing for the community. On top of just being putting social responsibility very high up on the agenda, I fully agree with James that that's sort of the basic thing you have to do to make sure you plow back some of your income and profits back to really good programs. But that's like basic policy stuff. But it should be really, really embedded in your business strategy. I like the word you use. It's an offensive weapon. That's the way we look at it. People would perceive that in Palestine, a bank operating in Palestine is probably not very profitable working in such an environment. But we've been, on the last 5-year basis, consistently outperforming banks not only in Palestine but in the whole Middle East. One of the fastest growing banks in the region. We've gone from about $1 billion in assets to almost $3 billion in assets in about 7-8 years. We've tripled in size in our branch network, in our employees, and our customer base. We have now a 30% market share. And it's because we really genuinely put the issue of diversity, especially when it comes to gender, bringing up from 5-6 years ago we were at about 12% female to male ratio. Today we're almost at 40%.
Wow,
in such a so we swung the other way deliberately, because you have to actually, what you preach, you have to practice. And that's the only way you can get the trust and the respect from your community.
That's a huge difference to have achieved. And also, it's great to hear the practical example as well, because we, from the beginning video that's mentioned, and also from research, is demonstrating that the more diverse a company is, or when looking at diversity, it does have an impact to the bottom line. So thank you for that example. So maybe one also to build on, also, James already started talking about Asia, but Fern, since with all of your great experience being based in Hong Kong, with also the organization that you have, can you tell us about building talent in Asia, and also what more that your organization is looking into?
Sure, Melissa. We found with the work that we do at Community Business through our research and the work in facilitating our network, that the more dominating diversity and inclusion issues usually relate to culture and the development of local Asian talent. Asia represents a key growth market for many multinationals, and in order for them to be successful in this very competitive environment, they need to identify top talent who can run their Asian operations and who can drive their global market strategies. So if you look at the leadership of many of these companies today, you see still a lot of non-Asians in key leadership roles. And much more really needs to be done to find and to build a diverse and deep talent pipeline of individuals who can progress to the top levels in these organizations. And unless companies do this, they really run the risk of not having a diversity of perspectives and optimal decision-making processes, but also they would lack the understanding of market nuances and dynamics. And as James said, Asia is very diverse in terms of different cultures, and there's just so many differences. And companies think that they can just come and just take a global people strategy or a diversity inclusion strategy and just roll it out in countries in Asia, it usually doesn't resonate.
And your organization is also looking beyond Asia as well and looking at other things such as you have an LGBT index as well. So can you tell us about that?
Yes, now our LGBT index has really become a game changer. We have started looking at the whole theme of LGBT workplace inclusion about 7 or 8 years, and we just recently introduced our index. And we were quite amazed that we had 35 companies participate in the index, and we ranked them. And financial services folks will be quite happy to know that the top 10 companies were really dominated by banks, investment banks and commercial banks. So we looked at, the index is really to benchmark how companies are doing across a number of different areas. And the leading organizations are looking at this as a business imperative. So beyond being an employer of choice and looking at their workplace strategy, how to leverage LGBT inclusion as a business driver. And tapping into, for example, the pink dollar. It's estimated that the global spending power of the LGBT consumer is $3.7 trillion US dollars, and it's really growing in Asia. So the more progressive companies are recognizing this is a great opportunity. And as James mentioned, an offensive move.
So more companies are then looking at this than more
Absolutely.
and more. Yeah. And building from there, from the keeping it to the culture side, and James, so you had a chance to address us overall with a lot of your perspective, but is there anything more that you can tell us about, from a cultural perspective, what you've seen in companies, what they're dealing with when it comes to the diversity issues?
I think I'm done.
You're done.
I mean, I've seen a lot. I've done a lot of consulting for companies, majority in the U.S., but they're multinationals. And what I'm seeing are pockets of groups that are being formed from the kind of the senior management level.
Okay.
So senior managers are creating these initiatives in the company. And I saw that at Microsoft, I saw that at P&G, and they are taking kind of a coalition approach to say, let's create, like the LGBT community, or let's create the even like religion community within the company. And so at the I guess the bilateral level, they're all saying we're part of the same initiative. So we're not saying we're more important than another. So we're all doing the same thing, but they are segmenting themselves to say, let's be very inclusive, and not only inclusive, but let's really build these pods, right? And then eventually, we've all heard this, the pods all lead up to the mothership, but it seems like it's happening at the kind of the senior manager level.
Okay, all right, great. When we were talking about the different levels of diversity, one thing that tends to be talked about less, and maybe that's just something that just happens naturally, because again, we hear equality, then we hear about gender, and then we talk about religion and all these things. But I'd like to bring up one word and actually ask Scarlett to address this. I don't know if it's a bad word or not, but it's certainly a word that's being thrown around a lot, and that is the word millennial. And to tell us about what your perspective is of being labeled as such, or what you think that means, or what your expectations are coming from, the generation that's been labeled as millennials. And
I personally hate the word, but it's one of those buzzwords that you hear so often. But I think it's interesting because, in fact, millennials are all of these things that we're talking about here. So it's very applicable to my and our generation. And we've already hit on some of the key points, but from a company perspective, it's really about being ethical. It's about being responsible and transparent. And we grew up with technology. It's not a nice tagline on your website. It's not about, doing it because you have to. It's about truly believing in the mission and helping people. And if you say that you're doing that and you're not, we'll know. We have large networks with the internet and what's happening now. It's a lot easier to see that. from what we would like out of an organization, I think there's kind of two main things, and we talked about this yesterday actually down at the InnoTribe session, but it's really about empowering millennials and letting them have an impact. And it's very easy early on in careers to silo them into specific fields, but if they feel like there's a purpose, they get excited about going to work. And with startups being such a huge part, and James knows about this, that's where they want to go. And we can talk about that a little bit more later, but there's obvious reason, because they see the actual input of what they do and how it impacts the business. So I think that's something that we really need to start thinking about.
Okay, great. Well, it leads us to the next step, which is taking a look at what we're all trying to do. We're trying to build fantastic teams. For me, I've had the benefit for many years working with trying to make excellent companies. And one of the things is hearing a lot of discussion about diversity, but it's been a lot of talk and not necessarily about making action happen. But one thing that is along the way is to find out and look at the great examples that are out there and aspire to be like that, and aspire to be like some companies that are coming forward, or even identifying why is it different from working from a small company to a large company? Why would you be driven in such a way? And it's about being able to create these diverse teams going forward, about building where they're coming from next, and seeing where we can go from here. So back to you again, Scarlett. So thinking about, especially when you're graduating, taking a look at when you were first looking into the field, when you were looking at where your next steps were, your classmates, what they were talking about, what were the types of organizations that were identified as someone who was attracting the millennial generation?
Yeah, and I think that there's been a large shift in that. So even when I was in high school and starting college, the top of the class was looking at the big FIs and the Goldmans of the world. And if you were Magna or Sumo, you were most likely going to one of those big places. And the big shift has been to large tech companies. And I've seen this all over the country. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. And the other word that is used often with millennials is entitled. And in fact, and so you see, okay, if we put a pool table in our office, millennials will come. It's not about that. I mean, yes, those are nice additions, and maybe that's what we talk about with each other. But it's all about the lifestyle that you have. Work, they don't mind, and going back to the entitlement, they think that they don't want to work long and work hard. And in fact, that's not true. And so, back to the startups examples, you see the Googles, the Ubers, the Snapchats. That's where we're going. We're shifting away from banks because we see the most potential there. And you talked about this a little bit as well. And of course, unfortunately, a lot of these execs are men. But it's if you see it, you believe it. And you see young people having a huge impact and running billion-dollar businesses. That's exciting. It's not, no offense, a 60 or 70-year-old white man running the business. And so they gravitate towards that because they can relate to it. And so I think that's one of the main focuses.
But it's more of, because I think it's the technology and the newness that's also attracting, but it's also, I think they're looking inside the company and they're seeing that it is diverse. It's actually attracting from their generation, their age group. They're seeing differences in it, and like you said, it doesn't look like it's all coming from one particular area. It looks diverse.
Yeah, and they're going there and they're having jobs. Back to what I was saying before, that has an impact. And I have friends who have chosen the traditional path, and of course, some of them are happy, but oftentimes they're siloed into a very specific role and they don't have access to the rest of the business and they don't know what other departments are doing. And I think that's actually a huge disadvantage to your company. And so that's what we were saying. I mean, if you have an opportunity, and even if it's not a senior role, it doesn't really matter. They're doing things that they believe has a true impact on the bottom line, and that gets them excited.
Okay, great. Well, let's build on more examples of what's being done so we can get a sense of where we could possibly take that. So, Hashim, if I could ask you about, for the Bank of Palestine, what things specifically are you doing within the bank? And also, I know that you're doing things also within the community as well, taking a look at diversity. I know you're looking at diversity in a few different ways as well.
Sorry, you gave me a few ideas on my notes, but look, just one quick thing. Palestine's population pyramid is like so steep. 75 or 76% of our population is under the age of 33 years old. Right. Okay, so that's your market. Okay, I was extremely privileged to become chairman and CEO of the bank at the age of 30. Okay, after 12 years at Citibank and HSBC around the world, I decided to go back to Palestine. I was, I think, the youngest chairman and CEO of any bank in the Middle East. It's typically, it's kind of run by, the older generation. It was overwhelming at a very young age to have such a top position and the bank at that time had about a 12% market share, 13% market share. I think having that sort of young, fresh look at things and being so, I'd just got married, I'd just building a family. I think I was, looking at things from that perspective. My friends and the community were in the same situation, and so you have a completely different perspective on things, I think, and you have to be sensitive to that, and then applying all the, knowing all the problems in the community and what people face and the challenges, applying solutions to those, and being very, not wasting any time to actually implement solutions, solving problems, investing a hell of a lot in technology. What we did, we decided to actually establish a startup company subsidiary to the bank that looks at the whole disruptive technologies sector, and we put a bunch of our IT programmers and engineers from the bank's IT department into this startup and told them to get creative. And they worked wonders. They created a fantastic payment platform, mobile payments, pay to friends, connecting this gateway with all the billers you can imagine from schools. Because, I looked at what people do all day. They run around trying to, the little income they have, figuring out how to juggle the bills, pay the school fees, the university fees, the municipality charges, the gas, the electricity, the telephone, the internet, the mobile, and it's all about bill payments and payments. And in a country where you still had, and you still have, a huge unbanked population, it would have been foolish for Bank of Palestine to just completely overlook the unbanked and overlook the problems that day-to-day life have. And in Palestine, we also have a lot of checkpoints, and moving from A to B is sometimes risky and dangerous. And the issue of solving, 50% of your population being women, and unfortunately women in the workforce in Palestine, it's on the lower side. So, but at the same time, they are much more engaged in the house finances and the bills and the schools and so on. So actually what we did was, and I think James mentioned this, you have your employees, okay? You need to listen to your employees. Get some input from them. Ask them what you think we should do. Because all these employees, they live in all these villages and rural areas and not just the cities, and they come in every day to work. So they go across the checkpoints, they see their parents and their families, what they go through and what they need to do every day. And so they gave us the advice. And then what we did was we went a step further and invited hundreds and hundreds of our customers to focus groups and work groups to listen to them and their needs, and community groups. And so we actually turned the bank, every town has not only a branch, but we have a whole floor, like a conference meeting hall, where we just have constantly meetings with community, with customers, with our own employees, listening, coming up with solutions to day-to-day problems. And so now to think that this sort of startup technology company, that we got into the driving seat instead of sitting on the back seat of the payments world for Palestine, but then that it solved the day-to-day problems and tapped in and served the unbanked as well as the banked, and that a woman, either a housewife or a woman business owner or whatever, or and the men as well, to actually pay for everything in a corner shop or a petrol station, and not have to waste a whole day to struggle and waste a day to go and make simple payments.
And in building your, it sounds like what you've done too is building the team to reflect actually the market that you serve.
Exactly.
So especially going from 12% to 40%, which is an incredible number, and I think that's something that I think we'd all like to be able to look at that. What are the ways that you actually change that percentage of the number of women who are working within the bank?
I think one thing was, addressing the embarrassing reality that we're really not a balanced organization.
Right.
And to frankly speak with the board and with our executive and management team, and realize that this is just not sustainable, and that we, if we want to preach that we're socially aware and sensitive and responsible, and we're going to serve the community and attract customers and whatever, well, you're not listening to, and you're not gearing yourself up to 50% of your population, the female population. So we basically put a positive discrimination policy in the bank until someone can prove to me that this job cannot be filled by a woman. We tried our best to search and for this job description. Then, so we swung the other way to try and get that percentage up, but also to make sure that women are in senior positions. So we had a huge amount of effort to make sure women were moving up career-wise, and so the appraisal process, the screening of our own HR, our employees, to make sure that we do get women going up to senior positions. So we now have, very proud to say, we have lots more women branch managers, department heads, the head of the bank's whole loan portfolio, our chief credit officer is a woman. That's our bread and butter. So many more on the executive team. A couple of years ago, we added a woman on the board. We have plans this year to add another. And we need to get to the 50-50. We have a target by 2020 to be 50-50. That's like the mission. But little things like making sure our HR policy, benefits, pay, child allowances. I discovered a lot of big problems that we were not giving women employees the same benefits that we were giving male employees because of traditional cultural, so women were not given the same healthcare benefits for their children because the assumption was that you're going to give the male employees healthcare for the male employee and his children, the family, and so that was covered. Well, no, we covered the woman and her children, and etc. Many things. What I want to do now is introduce flexible. Diversity also means being balanced. Also means being extremely flexible. And I think in this day and age, with all the pressures of work, home, family, lifestyle balance, you as an organization, you have to find ways of being more flexible to the female gender, and to allow, and frankly, men should be more engaged in the house and the kids, and taking the kids to school and doing all the stuff that women do. So, and I think with that, you have a more balanced outcome, and you can be much more profitable.
Well, and I love the way that you mentioned the word balance, and also taking a look at the flexibility. And I know that one last thing that I wanted you to address, and that is beyond also the gender side, you're also looking at engaging the disabled community as well. And so that, for me, I find also a wonderful initiative that I'd like to learn more about, and I'm sure we all would, because that also adds to the balanced aspect of who you're looking at within the organization.
I think it's all about also if you're a market leader, I think you can have massive impact on change in society. So if you and your competition will follow. And so if you embrace certain things and follow a certain way, typically others will follow, because our track record has proven when you do good, it performs. You get market share, it sells, and you gain people's trust. So we have a problem. I think it's a problem that the world faces with dealing with people with disabilities, and it's a shame on us all. And I think we need to break taboos. Even things like breast cancer awareness in Palestine. It was unheard of to go public with a breast cancer awareness campaign, and so over the last 5 years, we've been the national champion for breast cancer. We constantly, we flip all our billboards and all our advertising and all our channels during the global breast cancer awareness to pink and to the issue, and we do not only that. We do screenings. We pay for hundreds and hundreds of screenings for free, and encourage women to go for screenings and to talk about the issue and educate and so on. And so that's one thing. The other is disabilities. I realized, our branches and the way we're set up technologically, our delivery channels are not friendly to the disabled, whether it's the hearing or the blind or the access. And so that's all being transformed. So now we're starting with hearing disabilities. We've trained, I think, hundreds of our employees in sign language. So we make sure that in every branch there's two employees that know sign language, and make sure our ATMs and our online banking and mobile channels are all going in that way, and so on and so forth. That's what. And sorry, 6%. So we made this promise that 6% of our employees would be employees with disabilities, all kinds of disabilities. So again, when you're a service company and you deal with public, you have to walk the talk and practice what you preach. So if people come in and see people and employees with disabilities, and that it's okay, and that we're managing your money, and you put savings with us and we give you loans, and you're being served by someone with disabilities, and you're the leading bank, that can be a game changer in the community.
Okay, fantastic. That's building on the great ideas and examples. Fern, I know that in your business you see a lot of different organizations, you have different case studies and so forth. Are there organizations that come to mind as far as those that have who've really taken a look at diversity and what they've put in place as far as examples?
There's a lot of great examples, and we have several publications that people could download from our website that are specific, business cases around diversity. I just wanted to talk a bit more about what our recommendations are for companies to address issues around culture. We try to get companies to look at talent development using an Asian lens. So, for example, looking at the strengths, identifying the strengths and leveraging the strengths of their employees. For example, we talked a bit about communication and different communication styles. James alluded to this. People in Asia have a less direct style compared to people from the West. And that's because of a lot of reasons, but mainly because of how they grew up and what they've been used to within, their local context. So if companies are using Western sort of frame of references to assess talent, then they could be missing out on talented individuals. So we also advise companies to use targeted talent development strategies to address the needs of talent. For example, we know that in Singapore and Hong Kong, people don't like to go off and work in other countries. They really like to stay here. So what we recommend is, before people start families and get into sort of that phase of their careers, early in their careers, you should identify them as talent and give them those global opportunities, whether they're overseas or global opportunities. What we also do is advise companies to develop cross-cultural competencies across the whole organization. So for all their managers, anyone who's at a manager level, to really understand the dynamics at play around culture, because it could be quite complex. There are a lot of companies doing interesting things, just sort of aligning with the theme of being strategic and looking at the business opportunities. There are companies, for example, Deutsche Bank, who's created, I think it's called an EVA account, I think it was India, where they looked at the lifestyle of urban females, and they created a bank account just to cater for that, and really, and that product became, I think, a global product, and they really increased the market share. So looking at diversity, and there they did leverage on the knowledge and the experience of their own employees. So that's a very, very powerful concept, looking at your employees as potentially business partners who can help identify opportunities and create products.
And it's also, as James mentioned, looking at your employees as consumers, which I think also helps with that thought as well. Maybe one last thing as far as examples. James, did you, in all of your experience with different companies, are there any that jump to mind to you for those that are doing this especially well, something that we can learn from?
Well, I think I mentioned the Medtronics was unique.
Yeah.
And well, one other thing to that is he had a Asian conference, and it was all day long. It was literally, it started at 8 in the morning. They ate muffins and had coffee, and it went all the way until the end, where they had like a little band, and he was there the whole day. And this guy is someone who makes $50 million a year, right? And he's there the whole day. So I couldn't help myself. I said, well, Omar, why are you here the whole day? Don't you have some stuff to do? He goes, of course, but this is very important because this is the core of who these people are. And so when you open up that heart of affinity and you are there, you get in their core.
Right.
That was very philosophical, I thought.
I like also what you were mentioning too about it's celebrating the differences that we all bring, which is what diversity is all about. And I think, and also in that example of Medtronics, is instead of trying to make everyone homogeneous, it's more of, okay, yes, you are in this category, but what makes you different because of that, and what can we learn from that? And also from a pure business perspective, we're trying to reach that market, so we need to understand that a lot better. And that, I think, is an interesting way that they've looked at that strategy. So one maybe last question to all of us to go to each through, and then we'll open it up for questions in a moment. We talk about the word dream. Actually, it's mentioned. James mentioned the word already. Dream. That we may have for the future. I actually heard it last night as well. So I was at an event and we were there talking about Sibos. And Sibos itself talked about the dream of Sibos. It started with 300 people. So 300 people were the first group that came for the Sibos conference. And now it's more than 8,000. So starting with the dream is important because this is actually how we get to where we're going. And we're talking about diversity here and what we all may see in our own perspectives of where we'd each like to see it go to the next step. So from where we're, the environment we're in and so forth. So I'd like to each ask everyone, so what is the dream that you see that you'd like to go, and how would you say to get there? So maybe if we start with Fern, we'll go through, sorry.
I think, it's important for everybody to embrace diversity and inclusion. So in Asia, it's quite easy to have a diverse workforce, but really the return on investment on diversity comes with inclusion. So really to be able to value and empower every employee so that they're contributing to your business. So my dream is for organizations like ourselves not to even have to exist anymore. We do a lot of advocacy work. We talk to lots of different companies, and we do see progress, but there's a tremendous amount of work to do.
Progress is not that fast, though, no.
Very slow sometimes.
Very slow. Yeah, okay, great. Ashim, what would you say? What's your dream?
I mean, my dream is that I would see children today see this bank and think that's somewhere where I'd like to work, be the bank of choice for employment. Then employees to be loyal and be motivated to create and be as creative as possible and give us all their best. The bank to, of course, be profitable. And then for these employees to progress to the point where there is flexibility within the bank for them to leave, okay, start a startup, become a multimillionaire, become a shareholder in the bank, become an owner in the company, be in the General Assembly, vote for the policies that we're preaching about and supportive, and maybe if there's a capital increase, invest in the bank, and just keep that cycle going. I think that kind of, and of course around that whole cycle to just have the community actually, doing all the advertising that we need. I don't think really organizations spend way too much money on pointless advertising and very cheesy, overstated, statements, and they don't really deliver on it. They just put out these kind of philosophical statements, and they're not really, are they being measured to those statements? And I think companies don't really, and especially now with the young generation, and especially with social media and with how fast information is disseminated, I think you don't need advertising. I think if you do the right thing, if you listen to your employees, you listen to the community, you listen to your customers, and you constantly try to solve their problems and meet their needs, gain their trust, and that's the best advertising you can have, because the network and the social media and your shareholders and your customers will do all the advertising for you.
Right. Okay. Scarlett, what would you say?
Yeah, the dream would be to see children growing up and seeing a vision of themselves in the future, but I really want to have people leave this with tactical things that they can do within their organization. So there's some things that I want to go through really quickly, if you don't mind. The first one, and it's something that's true to me, is I feel like in large corporates, and of course this is Sibos, so there's a lot of big banks here, there's a lot of focus on experience. And while that's extremely important and in some cases crucial, I think there needs to be more of a focus on potential. And credit to BBVA, I wouldn't be here if it was about my experience. They saw initiative, they saw passion, and I convinced them based off of how excited I was about what they were doing that I could help them. And it's interesting, and we go to meetings with other partner banks, and I walk in the room, and I'm 20 years younger than anyone in the room, and they look at me in a different way, but by the end, I feel like they have a different perspective because I added value in a way that they weren't expecting. Yeah. So I think that's one thing. The second thing is around mentoring. It's hard, obviously, in corporate it has to be formal and structured, but I encourage all of you, it doesn't have to be millennial, just try to mentor in any way that you can. I've always was looking for female mentors. I found it very challenging, and a bunch of men mentored me and took me where I am. And I accredit a lot of my success to the men in my life, and sometimes they were within my organization. One was the CEO of my startup. Others were, people that I met in other startups. And so I think that's another really important thing. And of course, I kept mentioning the silos. And so if you have people, especially the younger millennials or entry-level positions, try to give them access to other sides of the business. And that could be through learning lunches where you have a specific department talking about what they're doing, just so they know what's going on. Because again, you can read stuff on the internet, but it's nice to see it and feel it and be part of that. So that's what I would advise to you all.
Fantastic advice. James, how about you?
I think it's a very, very tough question. I'm the last one, so I get to hear all your answers and go,
No pressure.
The concept of a dream, if you think about it, we stop dreaming it when we're older. It's sad.
Yeah.
And so when you ask that, I go, wow, I don't know actually. So I do kind of go back to when I was a child. Because when we're children, we dream a lot. And we, not just physically, but we dream about our future. But then when we're adults, we start not dreaming. And so I think going back to being a child, I don't know about you, but I remember those things called cultural fairs. You walk in and there's a big room and every kid brings their own food item, right, from their country, and you get to try each one. I think about that, a culture fair a lot. And I don't know if it's lunchtime, maybe I'm hungry. I think about a cultural fair. And then the second kind of a C word I think about is collage. When we were kids, we used to, create these beautiful collages, and typically a collage is from a collection of individual pieces that make up a beautiful piece. But we all know they're very different and individual. And so we take ownership over it. And the last C, I would say, the 3 C's, if you want to dub that, I'd say is curiosity. When we're kids, we're always curious. And so if we're curious about each other's culture and differences, I think that alone to me would be a dream that everyone would be curious about each other.
I love that. And maybe one thing to end on from at least from my organization, my perspective is one thing we do is we encourage the future generation. We take a look at, especially with the topics of math and science and engineering and technology, which is very much prominent in Sibos of what we're talking about, is to find the love in these subjects and to continue studying, and that with that continued learning and that continued studying, that anything is possible. So my dream, I guess, would be in talking about and hearing from all of us today is, building on that childlike curiosity and keeping that dream alive is making it so that anything is possible. If we're going to encourage the future to go after what you want to, is we need to make sure our organizations are ready for that and that we're breaking down those barriers to get there. So one last thing, and we're going to open it up for questions, is I did mention we do have 10 very wonderful young ladies that are with us today that actually have the great opportunity to join me for the rest of the day, and they get a personal tour of Sibos, and as well as having lunch with some of us to get to know who we are in our professions and so forth. So in thinking about our talent pipeline, future, where we're going, is there any advice that you'd give to these young ladies today as we're walking around and getting a chance to meet lots of great organizations and people, or looking to their future?
Yeah, I can start if you want.
Please, Scarlett, thank you.
This is something that I wish I was told when I was younger, especially being a woman. Be fearless. You are going to meet some really powerful, amazing people. And don't feel like if you have questions and they're explaining something and maybe you don't understand, ask them. No question is a bad question. And the power and opportunities that you have today, most people don't have your age. So take advantage of that. It's a huge, huge opportunity.
Fantastic. Anyone else?
Sure. I'd like to say, well, first of all, I think I have a degree in computer science, and which is very, very atypical for people that work in my field. I think it's okay to explore opportunities and to ask a lot of questions and not have, what you're going to do, all the answers about what that career path looks like in the future. Try different things and find out what you're good at. And it's okay to change your mind many, many times. I was very lucky to have a very diverse career. Spent 26 years in technology, and then I moved into other disciplines like HR and corporate communications and so on. But if I would have thought more widely and be more confident about my abilities, I probably would have followed a different career path. But anyways, no regrets.
Hashim or James?
Yeah, I'd say play with the Rubik's Cube a lot. Because there's a lesson there. Fail. Fail as many times as you can, and don't be afraid of failure. There's 43 quintillion combos, so you're not going to get it perfectly. So play with it a lot and keep failing, and by failing, I think we learn.
Fantastic. And Hashim, do you have anything?
Yeah, I think he just stole it. Okay, you skipped me.
I'm
Took
sorry.
My,
I was
I'm
trying to
joking.
first.
But no, I think you're really lucky because you're in. It's this age is primed up for this generation. I think in the fact that accessibility, speed, technology, and so on, and that they were born in a generation where they just, like how babies are thrown in. Some have this belief if you throw a newborn baby in water, they'll just swim, and apparently it's true. I mean, I didn't try with mine, but it apparently works. Don't try this at home, but they're just really lucky. I mean, I'm 39 years old, and I'm just so bad at computers and the iPhone and apps, and I'm useless at that. I still I have a smartphone, but I'm not using the smart stuff with the smartphone, and I'm embarrassed about it. But they're really lucky, and I think they need to really raise the bar for the industry, demand all the things that you can dream of from the industry, from the banks, from the car manufacturers, from the utility companies, from food and manufacturers, pharmaceuticals. You're their market, so you have to set raise the bar very high, and don't be afraid, and because all the companies are looking to your generation. They're tailoring their strategies, they're doing their research, they're doing their creating the next products for you. So I think you need to realize how be empowered. This is your moment.
Great, thank you. And so thank you very much for everyone. Thank you. So with that, then we'll open up to any questions. We have a few minutes left of the session. Great, and I think we have microphones around here. Yes.
Hi, I'm Ellie Chu. I'm from Barclays. I have a question for Hashim. You mentioned that you came in as a very young leader for the bank, but sounds like you've achieved a lot in the last how many years? Not many years, right? How did you come in and you developed these grand ideas, which are great ideas. How did you manage to get the buy-in from the management, from your shareholders, and to spend probably quite a bit of money to do this? And I have a second question, which is how you talked about positive discrimination. How did you not alienate your male talent pool with that as well?
Good questions. It wasn't easy. I mean, some of the stuff I was saying was like, what are you talking about? It was just it was like, sorry to use the term, Chinese. For us, it was like, what is that? It just didn't make sense to neither my board or management or the shareholders. But, it was my moment of, just business plan, pitch. I did a good pitch, and there was a leap of faith and trust, and our country was in a very volatile situation. There was war. There was, So I think, and frankly, I came from 12 years background in Citibank and HSBC. For someone to go back to Palestine with that CV and with the profile, I think I earned some of it, but I think I winged some of it, really, I'll be honest. I mean, I was like, you mean CEO, top position? Really? Me? So there's a bit of winging it, and involved. But I would say, how did I get buy-in? In the last, from taking my top position to now, I have not fired anyone. No major reshuffling, no major change in terms of, people. A lot of promotions, a lot of grassroots coming up, a lot of talent spotting. I think I not only raised the bar in my pitch to shareholders and to the board and to, but I then quickly delegated that bar to my team, and I think they also thought I was speaking Chinese, but they bought into it, and I think we delivered, and I think, because frankly speaking, everything I was saying, if you really analyze it, made sense. What, listen to your employees? Really? Should we listen to them? Okay, let's try it. So we invited them, we listened to them, and they came up with some good ideas. Okay, so I said, well, let's have lots of focus groups with customers. Focus group with customers? You mean listen to our customers? They're just going to complain. They're just going to, there's going to be a revolution, if you listen to the people. And I was like, exactly, that's what you should do. And it just, it was it was that kind of method, and it paid off. And the last thing is, I was very transparent with shareholders and with the, my General Assembly is we've increased our shareholder base dramatically. We've attracted foreign investment. We now have maybe 30% of our shareholders are foreign investors. Imagine, this is Palestine. Like, who would invest in Palestine? But we managed to get some of the best names: emerging market funds, new frontier funds, social impact funds. They love the story. They love what we're doing. Endowments, university, some of the top Ivy League universities are investing, their endowment funds in the bank. They use us as a case study of, do good and make loads of money, gain market share. So my General Assembly, when I speak to shareholders, I take them through all the details, extremely transparent. Our annual report is like, it just goes into details. Some people were telling me, you're giving everything to the competition. Your annual report is like so transparent. So you took corporate governance to the absolute extreme of details, not only in the way we're structured, salaries and all the stuff about, management and top management and what, who does what. But we go into details of products, of services, of in my letter to the shareholders, what we want to do, what is our strategy, in detail. And I think, and competition for the first 5 years, we're saying this guy he needs to go to a psycho hospital. He's crazy to think he can just bring these things to Palestine. And, I heard comments like, who does he think he is? It's like, who does he think Palestine is Switzerland or what? I mean, but it worked. And the big vision of tripling in numbers, opening, reaching 100 branches in 10 years, tripling our employees, tripling market share, all of this, it paid off. Because we were transparent, because everything was engaging the people, the community, the employees, the customers.
Fantastic. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, here.
I'm actually setting up a friend with this question, Scarlett. Typically, what I see with the banks is the younger folks that work there leave to go to a startup. You started with a startup and then came into a bank. Can you please talk about that experience and a couple of takeaways, because you got a room full of bankers right now?
Yeah. If you asked me, in fact, Sam knew me when I was at the startup. If you would have asked me a year ago if I would be at a large corporate bank of 110,000 people, not in my wildest dreams. And when the conversation first happened, it was very casual, and I was expressing a desire to do something different because we were not having the growth curve that you see in startups. And my first response was, there's no chance. Then they talked to me about their vision and their mission, and for me, what really differentiated BBVA was our executive team. And again, being a millennial, I started doing research, and it wasn't something that now that there's all this corporate money and it's sexy to be in fintech and startups. Our chairman has been talking about this for 7 years. This is something that he truly believes, and we were actually forward thinking. They weren't saying that, there was proof. So that, for me, was one of the first things. Part of it, too, was the team that I was surrounded with, the people who hired me, I really respected. And by the way, they were not all bankers, and some were and some weren't. And so even in the fact that while they maybe looked the same, they were all older males, their backgrounds were extremely different, and the way that they approached problems was extremely different. And so I think part of it too is engaging the conversation. I didn't go into an interview without knowing anything about them. In fact, I didn't really ever interview formally. So yeah, like I said, and when we were first talking about it, the position required 3 times the years plus experience that I have. And they convinced me, and then I convinced them why I was the right person. Yeah, the takeaways is show what you're doing and why you're different, and why that matters, and why people should care. And it doesn't have to be about millennials. In fact, I think there's too much focus on banking for millennials, but what are you doing to help make an impact on the world? Are you focused on financial inclusion? Are you focused on within your country, within your city? Do things that matter, and people will care, and they'll want to come be part of that. And like I said too, it's potential, and that's one thing that I was quite concerned with. In fact, why I went to startup and not corporate, and I was the one top of the class and all of that, was because the hierarchy intimidated me. I did not see myself at the top. It's 2 years, 4 years going on, and so forth. And so BBVA told me, listen, you prove yourself, and you have huge potential here, and the sky's the limit. So that's what I needed. They gave me my chance, and hopefully I'm proving them right.
Fantastic. Great. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, Lisa, yes. Yeah.
Really quickly, on the Cornell study, as well as in some of the topics there, there's always the discussion that it's taking longer, or that there is an inflection point, and that you had to work your way through that. Any advice on how you could accelerate?
Yep.
Anything?
Sorry, I didn't.
Stumped you.
What
so
was
I was
the?
wondering how you can accelerate.
Accelerate.
Bringing diversity into the mindset and really seeing it transform within your organization, as opposed to an old adage that would say that you had to be patient. There would always be a drop. And some of the new learnings around change management says that old storming norming phase of where people would be upset and difficult, you can actually get ahead of that and in front of it, allowing you to lead from the moment it's introduced, or the moment that you can get something through. So how can you accelerate volume? Maybe is the right question.
If I can just say something on that, is just cut out all the time wasting. Don't form too many committees and do too much research and whatever. Make your research very practical and make it very business focused, and what's your goal, and then just set up the right dream team within the bank, and choose not only the traditional who you'd think would be the traditional senior members of the team to do it. Delegate, empower people, get your people engaged and coming up with problem solving and solutions, and drive projects and change that way. It can go through the system a lot faster.
I'd just like to add, understand the business drivers for your organization and articulate that business case. And not only from the top, but middle management really needs to understand and embrace it. And then, do all the things, create the right structure, but really push and communicate about it all the time, and have KPIs around it. just as you would do with any business strategy.
And one last thing I would add to that is just coming from a software guy, a waterfall approach was a way software was built in the past, but now it's MVPing. And so now even corporations are like MVPing, which is pretty cool to see. And so MVP is just, minimum viable product. And so it's like just getting something real small, just get it out there and see what the employees think about it. And then iterate instead of this long process. I think is one way that could work.
Great advice.
Yeah, great advice. Thank you, everyone. So thank you very much for the session today, and we'll be around for any questions, but thank you, and thank you all of you for being part of our great panel. Thanks.